Hello. This is part two on a three-part series on pain. And today we're going to cover the ego's use of pain. So I want to recap the first episode where we reviewed the cause. The cause of pain is separation, not the body, which is its effect. So it's really very simple. The cause of pain is separation. Easy. Um, so pain is caused by separation, but there is no separation, which really kind of leads us to the two lines that sum up the entire course. Nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. So, in one way or another, everything we say about anything is a restatement. We're just kind of repeating the same thing over and over again until we get it. So, the separation is unreal. It creates a state that does not exist. So it seems very real to us, of course. We need our path, or we seem to need our path. So basically saying, since there's no separation, there really is no such thing as pain. The way that this can be easier to see is when we consider an hallucination. If we're having auditory and visual hallucinations, we see and hear things that are not there. To us, they seem very real. But to the truth, from the perspective of truth, or anyone who's not insane, there is literally and truly nothing there at all. I just think that's one way to kind of understand that, because it can be so misunderstood. The separation literally never happened. Nothing happened. The last thing I want to recap is the closing. The last session, I said we can't go wrong at the level of the world, only on how we look at it. And that cannot be overstated. We cannot go wrong at the level of the world. The only thing we need to think about is who we're looking with, how we're looking upon it. Who is our teacher? Is it the ego or is it Jesus? And that's the only way in which we can go wrong. And that leads us into examining how the ego uses pain. So the ego thought system is a thought system of sin, guilt, and fear. We sinned in the past, we're guilty in the present, and we fear the future. So the ego uses pain to maintain its thought system. In the simplest terms, we would say the ego uses pain to prove guilt's real, to make sure everyone is grounded in the body with no apparent means of escape. So that's also very simple. But why be short and simple when we're talking about a 669-page text? So I'll go on. The other thing I want to say is we talk about the ego as though it's separate from us. I think it's important just to note we all identify with the ego for all intents and purposes. We are the manifestation of that ego thought system. When we talk about the ego as a separate voice, a separate teacher, we're dissociating from it to see ourselves differently, to choose a different teacher. And so you can say, oh, that's a dissociation. The true disassociation is believing in separation. So the correction for that dissociation, turning our back on the truth and joining with the idea of separation and then joining with the idea of the ego thought system, that the dissociating from the ego we believe we are right here and now is a correction. And the other thing I want to say is that I'm talking about being in pain, people in pain, physical pain as it's experienced. So we all know that the pain is in the mind, but we experience it in our body, either psychological or physical. What separates the sick and suffering and those who don't seem to be sick and suffering in a dream world of illusion is only time. So, and this really applies to everyone because we don't always see ourselves in that way, but it truly applies to everyone who seems to walk the earth. Sickness, suffering, and grievous loss are the lot of everyone on earth, which God abandoned to the devil's care, apparently, to quote the Song of Prayer. So, Ken used to say that we love our pain and we cling to our pain. It's like saying we cling to the idea of guilt being real. And he would say, you can take anything you want away from me, but don't take my pain. People get very defensive when you start talking about their pain not being real. But see, we're not really we're not really trying to take pain away from anyone. It's to address the cause and the way we use it to see it differently so that it's not a bar to awakening. We cling to it because it proves we're victims. Something else is guilty. It seems to save us from a worse punishment. These are all things that, I remember Ken talking about. Um, See, like everything with the ego, when we really look closely at it, it's so clearly insane because we're looking with the light of reason, standing back. And, you know, even if we believed unconsciously that our pain would protect us from wrath and ensure another person's guilt, we're still suffering. We don't gain anything, and we're still going to die. So the ego offers us things in a way that makes it seem like we're gaining something, but we gain nothing. That is so illuminated by the Course. We gain nothing from this thought system that we cling to, from being so in love with guilt. Um, so the world was made to prove that the cause of my suffering is not in my mind, and the ego teaches that the cause of my pain and suffering is something separate, definitely separate from my mind or anything that I chose. So I really want to read a kind of long section from The Attraction of Pain. It's just um, illuminating. Jesus says in The Attraction of Pain, the body can bring you neither peace nor turmoil, neither joy nor pain. It is a means and not an end. It has no purpose of itself, but only what is given it. The body will seem to be whatever is the means for reaching the goal that you assign to it. Not the you, and I'm inserting this, not the you as a figure in a dream you identify with, because only the mind can set a purpose. He goes on to say that it is impossible to seek for pleasure through the body and not find pain. Impossible. It is essential that this relationship be understood, for it is one the ego sees as proof of sin. It is not really punitive, it's but the inevitable result of equating yourself with the body, which is the invitation to pain. For it invites fear to enter and becomes your purpose, for fear to enter and become your purpose. The attraction of guilt must enter with it, and whatever fear directs the body to do is therefore painful. It will share the pain of all illusions, and the illusion of pleasure will be the same as pain. When he uses words like essential, impossible, and must, we really need to take notice here. So we join the ego's purpose for the body. And he says, it has no purpose of itself, but only what's given it. And the mind assigns that purpose. We join with the ego. The ego's purpose of proving guilt is real is our purpose. And that's what we use it for. That's what we use everything for, absolutely everything. It will share the pain of all illusions, and the illusion of pleasure will be the same as pain. Under fear's orders, which can also be read as ego's orders, under fear's orders, the body will pursue guilt, serving its master, whose attraction to guilt maintains the whole illusion of its existence. This, then, is the attraction of pain. Ruled by this perception, the body becomes the servant of pain, seeking it dutifully and obeying the idea that pain is pleasure. It is this idea that underlies all of the ego's heavy investment in the body. And it is this insane relationship that it keeps hidden and yet feeds upon. To you it teaches that the body's pleasure is happiness, yet to itself it whispers, it is death. So we really only are ever pursuing the ego's purpose for the body. We see, we look outside, we constantly look at the world to see what we can get from it or what we can blame it for. And that's apparent in all of our relationships. We either feel like we got something we wanted, or we didn't. So the ego decides after every engagement, was it acceptable or does it call for vengeance? And that's the evaluation we spend our lives making. And I really think, if we don't look at these things, I don't know how we'll get anywhere. You know, our face of innocence, we just cling to that so strongly. We don't really want to see this underlying, kind of attacking, murderous thought that seems to um, inexplicably compel us to constantly seek out guilt and just lay blame everywhere because we can't really consciously understand the depth of the guilt that lies within us. And we can't see that it's made up if we're not willing to look at it. So we need to be jarred. Something needs to move us from this position. And that's why I really do these. I'm trying to move us from our fixed position here to look at the jarring parts of it. So I'm just going to read some quotes. The ego's messages are always sent away from you in the belief that for your messages of attack and guilt will someone other than yourself suffer. And even if you suffer, yet someone else will suffer more. The ego bids the body search for pain and attack upon another, calling it pleasure and offering it to you as freedom from attack. Let me just see let's see if I can find quickly what section I'm referencing, just for your edification, in case you want to. Oh, sorry. I guess I didn't make a note of that. No, wait, maybe I did. So the ego's messages are always sent away from you. And, we may not totally identify with the idea that we're sending messages of attack and guilt so that someone else will suffer more than us. That's a self-image, self-concept that we might not embrace, but we can see it when we see someone worthy of such attack and guilt, when we see something that we think is an atrocity. Then we do see in ourselves that kind of love of attacking and wanting them to suffer. It really is only a matter of whether or not we've deemed it acceptable or whether it calls for vengeance. If we see something that calls for vengeance, we don't hesitate to attack and find guilt. So, we form our allies and we decide who the enemies are. And so we can see it in ourselves when the right antagonist appears. We're all the ego's disciples. We all believe that yielding to the attraction of guilt is the escape from pain because we equate ourselves with the ego. So the ego would never want me to learn that the cause of my pain is guilt within me. It has to be something outside of me. So the ego would never have me look within, would only have me look without. And whether I'm looking in the little microcosm of my world and see it in my spouse or child or friend or someone close to me, or whether I see it in someone who's very far away from me on a larger scale, doing what I think is wrong or evil, I can find cause. I can see guilt for my upset and distress or pain and suffering. So in chapter 15, section 7, he says, suffering and sacrifice are the gifts with which the ego would bless all unions. And those who are united at its altar accept suffering and sacrifice as the price of union. And here's another window into ourselves as bodies in a world. In angry alliances born of fear of loneliness, dedicated to the continuance of loneliness, each seeks relief from guilt by increasing it in the other. So here he's really talking about our close personal relationships, our family members, our circle. For each believes that this decreases guilt in him, we'll try to see guilt in the other to decrease it in ourselves. And that's, what we do with our unions. The other seems always to be attacking and wounding us, perhaps in little ways, perhaps unconsciously, yet never without demand of sacrifice. In sacrifice here, there's no scope. If you feel you're giving up anything at all, it's a sacrifice. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale. The fury of those joined at the ego's altar far exceeds your awareness of it. And that's really important, I think, because, you know, even a slight twinge of annoyance um, in through the course's perspective represents fury. In chapter 22, illusions carry only guilt and suffering, sickness and death to their believers. The form in which they are accepted is irrelevant. No form of misery in reason's eyes can be confused with joy. And you can be sure that any seeming happiness that does not last is really fear. In chapter 24, only this is certain in this shifting world that has no meaning in reality. When peace is not with you entirely, and when you suffer pain of any kind, you have beheld some sin within your brother and have rejoiced at what you thought was there. Now, that is a powerful, powerful statement. When peace is not with you entirely, you've beheld some sin within your brother and rejoiced at what you thought was there. The way we can accept the statements that he makes about what we have made of ourselves and see that within ourselves is really, if you can't see it, I see it as an intellectual exercise because it is a conclusion born of the representation, the statement of facts about what he's already established and what it means to be a body in a world. You must have beheld some sin within your brother, and the way in which you're rejoicing is because the pathways of the world seemed safe. And he says here, your specialness seems safe because of it. And thus you saved what you appointed to be your Savior and crucified the one whom God has given you instead. So we really go around crucifying each other. Now, that's not everybody. We only need a few enemies. We just need to see guilt outside of ourselves, someplace, in some way. And sometimes it's a very public figure, and sometimes it's the guy down the street. We just need to behold some sin somewhere that's not in us. And in chapter 27, whenever you consent to suffer pain, to be deprived, unfairly treated, or in need of anything, you but accuse your brother of attack upon God's Son. You hold a picture of your crucifixion before his eyes, that he may see his sins are written in heaven in your blood and death, and go before him, closing off the gate and damning him to hell. Yet this is written hell and not in heaven. The picture of yourself you offer him, you show yourself and give it all your faith. So in order for me to damn him to hell, I have to accept a picture of myself that is weak and miserable and vulnerable and defenseless and injured. I have to be that thing in order to damn him to hell. So I'm trying to raise into awareness for us these descriptions of ourselves. It is everyone. It is you and me and everyone who seems to walk the earth. We're all doing the same thing. We are all using everything to prove sin and guilt are real and try to keep it from resting on ourselves. And the more we're in pain and seeing the cause outside of ourselves, the better able we're to do that. That is the purpose. So we're able to do it through seeing cause outside of ourselves. And again in chapter 27, a sick and suffering you, but represent your brother's guilt, the witness that you send, lest he forget the injuries he gave, from which you swear he never will escape. This sick and sorry picture you accept, if only it can serve to punish him. The sick are merciless to everyone, and in contagion do they seek to kill. Death seems an easy price if they can say, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I die." For sickness is the witness to his guilt and death would prove his errors must be sins. The bleak and bitter picture you have sent your brother, you have looked upon in grief, and everything that it is shown to him have you believed, because it witnessed to the guilt in him which you perceived and loved. So there we can see what we really do with pain. We see that guilt somewhere and we love it. And we are not going to be able to see that it's all made up if we won't look at what we have made of ourselves. We don't need the face of innocence. We don't even get anything out of it. We're still suffering. And I believe it's in Self-Concept versus Self. He says something like, who cares if you have a face of innocence if you still have to react to wicked things? You have to interact with wicked things. So if we can just see beyond that, then we'll be closer to seeing that it's all made up. And it's painful. It's not fun to see ourselves as someone who is delighting in finding guilt in other people, delighting in the idea that they are damned to hell and not me. Ken used to say we walk around with two books, and one book is all the great things I've done, and in the other book is all the horrible things everybody else has done. So we're always trying to avoid that wrath. Um, and even in our pain, we're kind of saying to God, the God we made up, the ego God, hey, look, I'm already suffering. You don't got to get me. See, I've already taken care of it. I'm already in pain. And, you can go after somebody else who's the really guilty one. Um, I think it's always really important to say none of this is about behavior. It's not like going to people and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I was blaming you or feeling guilt." It's not about what you say or do. It'll never be about that. And that's why I started this whole thing off by saying it can't be overstated that we can't go wrong at the level of the world. Whatever the body seems to do here, the body seems to do. Whatever it says, it says. Whatever it does, it does. Our concern is with looking at it with the right teacher. It is only looking. Forgiveness is only looking. It's not doing. Our instinct, our inspiration to try to fix something because we see these horrible things within ourselves or other people and we want to make it better. We can't. We can't. It is a useless endeavor. It is the most futile thing to do to try to go around fixing things. Um, because it's a course on looking with the light of reason. This is the light in the dream. And we all share the same need, as he says in the workbook, to learn the happy habit of response to temptation, to perceive ourselves as weak and miserable by saying, I am as God created me, his son can suffer nothing, and I am his son. What the workbook doesn't say is, go apologize to everybody you ever met because you were so unfair to them, you saw guilt in them, and then feel terrible because you're the miserable sinner. See, if we try to do anything in the world, we're just further perpetuating the idea that we are a body and proving God wrong. Nope. Well, my pain proves, in my mind, of course, proves God's wrong, but that's because I'm sharing the ego's purpose. When I stop sharing that purpose to prove I'm right about what I am, I'm right about what God is and what everybody is, and guilt is real. When I stop sharing that purpose, when I even question that purpose, when I even question whether everything I believe is accurate, that's a step in the right direction. So, in the next section, I want to talk about magic versus miracles, and that'll be the last session on this kind of talk about pain. I said it before in the first one, but I wanted to focus on pain because I'm in physical pain. The pain is not the problem, it's the way we look upon it and the way we use it, and that's always going to be the case. Now, of course, we're going to try to alleviate that pain using things in the world, and it's all going to seem to be um, a belief in magic. But in magic versus miracles, I want to talk about how the way we look upon magic and miracles is really all that matters. That's not about behavior either. So nothing will ever be about that. And also acknowledge that there do seem to be choices to be made here. And um, I'll go into that a little more in the next session. So let's all walk with hearts that beat in hope, do not pound in fear, and look without judgment, without fear. Thanks for listening.